stand. The microphone's not very strong, so come and stand
I'm loud, it's
and
fine.
protect your voice.
Okay, so we're from Press Hill, as you know. I'm Iris, this is Eddie. I don't know if this is useful, but I'm in year 9 and he's in year 8. So we talked about, in my group, we mainly talked about, oh my god, this is a little intimidating, I'm very sorry. We talked about opinions and the way that opinions get split up within certain groups of people and identity and all those kind of things. So we formed and
in our group we talked about what makes you your personality, what makes you you.
Yeah. So we formed the question: how does our identity affect our opinions and the opinions we have on other people and the opinions that other people have on us? So we were talking about monism and dualism and how the brain and the body and the soul affect how we think about ourselves, and what even is the brain and body and soul, and what is identity, and how does that form within ourselves. So we kind of kept going round and round in circles, but it was a really interesting conversation to have, and I think it's a really important conversation because, philosophy, there's not one answer that you can have. It's kind of impossible. That's what philosophy is. So, yeah.
Yeah, so we came up with the example of if our memory is completely wiped, our entire being completely wiped. We don't remember our language, we don't remember our past experiences, we don't remember even existing, we don't remember our age. Are you still you? What are your opinions?
Can you tell us how this connects with any particular work of art? Can you show us a connection with the art experience?
So we had a artwork that had 10 portraits, and it was to do with, this one. So each portrait showed a different decade and how the relationships that it had with Indigenous culture and the Federation of Australia, and how Indigenous culture was implemented within that. So we were talking about this and how identity was such a huge thing with culture and opinions, because all of these people who had specific identities, because of their culture, it got completely ripped away from them and taken away when white settlers and English settlers came to Australia. So we were talking about how identity was formed and how it was taken away, and how the opinions, no one's going to have the same opinion on this, because every single person, everyone here is going to have a slightly different opinion. Even if some of you agree with me when I say it was awful that we colonised the Indigenous land, and some of you might disagree with me, but even if you have the same view, it's going to be slightly different no matter what. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. So just to be clear, we've got just only 1 or 2 minutes to speak, and then leave time for people to ask you questions as well. Thank you so much, Crystal, for that. And so we've got McClellan. Let's go, Don't forget to leave time for questions.
Leave time for questions. Right. Hello everyone, my name's Lachlan.
My name's Angus.
We're from McClellan College. Hope you all prepared your cameras, because this is going to be an absolute laugh for all.
Which work of art? The work of art up.
Put our work of art up. Yeah, okay.
No, David will do it for you.
Okay.
Which one was it?
So the one we chose was the closet party one, or party closet. I can't remember the name. It's that one. Yes.
Great.
This is the one we're going to talk about. So the thing that our school started discussing when we came together was the idea that art is used to teach the public of people's individual identities.
Can we continue?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So in terms of art and as a form of expression, most of the concepts that pieces explore are very abstract and don't necessarily conform to what we consider natural beauty in a sense. So we found that through expression and bringing it to the mainstream, it's very reliant upon the openness and the willingness of others to really accept and, I suppose, adopt other people's views.
Couldn't have put it any better myself, Angus.
Okay, questions.
All right, questions. Anyone got any questions?
Too good.
Yeah, too good. Hello, yes.
I will sacrifice myself. Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Why did you pick this art piece in particular?
You want to go?
Why did we pick this one? That's a good question. So we chose this piece of artwork because it best represents personal identity being taught to the public, because as you see, you've got these people with rather masculine bodies wearing feminine clothing. It's also, if you can look closely, if you can see it, it's got all this writing down along it, and it is showing what society tries to perpetuate onto individual people. Any other questions? Yes.
Why?
Why?
Shall we keep going?
That's also a really good
That's a
question.
philosophical question.
Yeah, extremely philosophical. Why? Why? Yeah, I'm asking you.
I've written it before this, but
Okay.
Oh, you're written? Okay.
yeah, I've written it.
We're going to leave you all to answer that question.
Okay, thank you. We're here until we leave.
Okay. Good luck to Prince High School. Question, are you? Walking age.
So I'll
That's the one.
That's it.
This is the art we're looking at, and we asked the very narrow question of what is identity?
So we thought of many different things throughout discussing what identity could be. Our initial thought was it was a collection of things. A collection of things by themselves weren't identity, but once collated now becomes identity and part of a person's individual identity. But then we started getting into the questions of, well, if that's your identity, what about other people's opinions on your identity, and how you present yourself might be different to how you actually feel, which brought on this interesting duality between your self-identity and the identity you present to others, or the identity that people perceive onto you.
Yeah, and then we thought of this idea that there's kind of two worlds that we inhabit. One is the identity in which we perceive as ourselves, and one is the identity that others perceive of you. So, and then there was the question of, do these two identities, the one of yourself and the one people perceive of you, do they connect, or are they completely separate from each other? And this raised a lot of other questions from that.
We talked about the artwork in relation to this. We talked about the shields and the kind of idea of protecting one's identity and like kind of developing this like divide between the identity of yourself and the identity you present to others.
Yes,
Any questions?
in the last 8 seconds.
Yes.
You mentioned your perceived identity and what you think of yourself. Do you think one overpowers the other?
That was a question we asked, and we did not find an answer, but there is a certain integrity in the idea that perhaps the more true or the real identity is the one of you perceive of yourself, because identity is inherently connected to yourself, and if you know how you interpret yourself, then you can probably go farther than if you only know how others interpret you.
Privilege.
Okay.
Okay. You know who you are?
So
School?
Melton, pick it up.
I'm not sure where to start.
Especially speaking to the audience, like a video.
So our conversation kind of started around utilitarianism. In this picture, we interpret it as like indigenous ways of life, in the way they kind of did their agriculture, and then we went on a bit of a tangent, but we talked about Australia's history, Australia's colonial history. And from there, we asked the question whether the ends justify the means. And originally, we said, no, they don't. Where we are today does not justify what happened in the past. But then we went to critique the idea of Utilitarianism?
Yeah, basically, we broke down the concept of the ends justify the means, and we asked ourselves, well, what is the ends? Is there actually an ends? And we thought about it more, and in talking about it, we realized, is there even an ends, or is it just a continuous cycle of results?
Yeah.
So even though we could say maybe the ends justify the means in certain circumstances, what are the ends? Are they even ends for means to justify?
Yeah, the ends are never ending, so then we can't choose a position that justifies past action. Any questions? See, sir. Yes.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
So I like that ends justify the means, the issues of that philosophy that include not only does it debunk utilitarianism, but also some utilitarian beliefs. So when you say ends justify the means, what sort of person, who do you think is trying to set parameters for the ends and using that to
I think I know what you mean. Around ethics and our own personal ethics, I feel that the person who originally did the action, they kind of create their own ends to justify their past actions.
What they dictate as the ends.
Yeah.
What they interpret the ends as.
I think that's kind of our way of alleviating the guilt of our actions. We decide when our end is, and it's a bit selfish in a way. Any more questions?
Do you think that there is a positive, like you've debunked in this term, utilitarianism? Do you have any sort of other framework that you think that we should use to decide our moral actions?
We discuss we talk about other moral theories in regards to the same situation, and most popular seem to be deontology, the idea that it's the intention behind your action that matters the most, and if you have the goodwill in making your decision, then that's a better framework than saying the ends justify the means when, as we've established, there are flaws with that concept. But there's also things to criticize deontology for as well. And we went into a whole other conversation about that.
Is it actually morally problematic to be selfish?
That's a huge question. I feel like with morality, it's kind of there's two sides of the same coin. It's whether you think selfishly or you think of the greater good and the outside society. I think that's something you have to take on a personal level, whether you should only think for yourselves or for others. I don't know. I think
leaving it up to us.
So cruel cutting off that conversation.
Yeah, so cool.
Really rich conversation. Okay, over to Virtual School Victoria. As we're getting ready, it's extraordinary to see the diversity of schools in this room at the moment as well too. Okay, which book is that?
This one's a good one. Okay. So we talked about this one in relation to self-identity and how stereotypes and stigma can be something so closely related to maybe your culture or your ethnicity. And when that's such a big part of your self-identity and it's so engulfed in other people's influences, sometimes you can take that on yourself. And that's what was in this painting, in this picture. All over this boy's clothes is a story of horrible names he was called at school and how he tried to reach out for help, but no one would give it to him. So he sort of took on that self-identity. And sometimes it's like, well, what is identity? Is it other people's influences? Is it your opinion?
And one of those kind of sort of threads that we connected in our discussion through all the artworks we looked at was the idea of whether art needs to have a moral message or not, because a lot of the artwork that we've looked at, it's kind of painting a picture of discrimination as being a bad thing, or the suffering that has been inflicted upon people. And we wondered whether all artwork does need to have a
moral message or a message at all, whether the creator of the artwork, if their perspective is really all that important when it comes to art. Questions? Yeah.
In that picture, the words and the stories written on the person's clothes, did you guys connect that to the story and that idea being removable from the true identity, or did you guys?
Yeah, we
come back to
discussed
the same
it.
thing?
Maybe when you're young, you can take on other people's influences and their opinions as your identity. And then as you grow older, like you might find people that encourage you to be yourself. Then you can remove like external influences and decide who you are on your own terms. Yes.
So you talked about how as you get older, maybe you can meet other people who encourage you to be yourself. Will that also count as external influence, even though it's positive?
It will count as an external influence, but I think for a lot of people, you sort of have this idea of who you are, and it might not go with what certain people say. So then you might find someone who you feel it's easier to be yourself. It's easier, you don't have to act a different way. Maybe that encourages you to be a bit more who you are.
Right. So the point in which someone realizes their self-identity, does that also encompass positive external feedback?
I think it can, yeah. I think it encompasses a lot of things. I think identity can be different for a lot of different people. It might be external, it could be internal.
Yeah. Thank you.
I just want to ask this question about morality in art and how you meant that statement earlier. Do we mean that when one creates a work of art, it is inescapable that there will be a moral interpretation of that work of art? Or did you mean, and I don't know if this is a different interpretation, that to create art you must have a moral message when you're making a creation?
I think that when art is made, it may have a moral interpretation or not. But once it's out into the world, you can't control if it is interpreted with moral or not, because it's out there and you don't really have a sway over what people think.
I could even say that it should be morally edifying, so that by looking at it, you become better. It might not have necessarily a message, racism is bad, but by the experience of it, you might develop, cultivate disposition to be a moral person.
And you think that's an essential part of something being called art?
You mentioned internal and external influences, and you said that at one point the external influence. Do you think that at one point external influences stop influencing you, and at the same time, how do you differentiate between external and internal influences? Would you argue that they're the same?
I think it becomes a bit difficult because if you can like internalize external opinions, it becomes very hard to differentiate between what I think is me and what I think because other people want it to be me. So I think it's very personal and a very long discussion as well.
Wonderful.
I have to say, Jeanette, this discussion we're having now is so rich, so
yeah, it's wonderful. So the last group. Oh, is this the last group? Yes.
Oh, okay, big boys. Wait, yeah. Oh, what is the word?
Okay. So basically, in our group, we were talking about how art speaks louder than words, and words can be uttered, but art depicts more than it. So that's what we're talking about mainly. And this.
So we chose the yam drawing because within our group that examined the yam drawing, there was a lot of debate going on to was this art or was it just scribbles and what gave it the merit to be art. And we all had kind of confided in the fact that once we knew the artist's intention behind the big yam thing, that we could consider it art and not just something you'd find in a hotel lobby or just and so that sparked a lot of. We went on a bit of a tangent, like many people did.
Yeah, so we got lots of different ideas. Everyone perceived it differently. I personally thought at the start, like I can't speak for everyone, but I thought it was just scribbles. Then I looked deeper. I saw white and black, segregation maybe. Then I also saw the Aboriginal timeline about like the white, lots of black here, how it might have been in the earlier days, and then it goes a little bit past the European settlement into more of a colonized white.
So we were both in group 2, and Jeanette was our group leader, and she had posed the question of what is everyone's criteria for art, and we had all kind of decided that everyone's criteria for art was was very, very subjective. So yeah. Anyway, questions in the 17 seconds we have.
You can field your own.
Damn it! It's okay, you can spend your time.
I just both you had your hand up.
There's no question.
Someone else go. I
I was just wondering, can you give us an example of what some of the subjective?
I'm sorry, can you speak louder, please? It's
I
okay.
was just wondering, what are some of the subjective criteria that you came up with for the art?
Yeah.
We actually had like a long conversation about the criteria.
Very long.
And the criteria we found was, we talked about the emotional level.
So Cash talked about the emotional impact.
Yeah, so like how I wanted the criteria of art to be emotional, it has to spark emotion in me, and Georgie talked.
And I talked about the artistic intention and the fact that art has to be a representation or a commentary on something imaginative or something in the physical world. So we came to the conclusion it was all subjective and it was relative. So